Now, I've had a bit to say this week about US President Joe Biden and much of the US media as well, trying to smear their opponents, smear the political right with political violence. Instead of accepting that the US sees too much political violence and that we've seen it committed by and against both sides of politics, Biden's tried to use it against the Republicans. He's even pretended that only Republicans have refused to accept election results when we've seen many instances of Democrats doing the same. Now, this is pretty tacky stuff, but what's worse is the way our Prime Minister here has tried to import the same argument and use it against the coalition. Anthony Albanese has criticised former Prime Minister Scott Morrison for not calling out Donald Trump over the Capitol Hill riots in the US last January. He told The Australian that Morrison was alone, really, among Democratic leaders in not calling it out, citing other nations and saying the circumstances in the US with people almost in paramilitary gear is a concern. That concern has been expressed quite rightly by President Joe Biden. Albanese went on to say the way political discourse is being conducted is far less civil. I think it's of great concern, of real concern. He says this stuff's getting worse. Well, firstly, Morrison did condemn the violence and did admonish Trump. What he didn't do was go over the top and jump to conclusions back in January last year. And I repeat, the point here is that all politically motivated violence is wrong. It should always be condemned. You can't pick and choose which politically motivated violence you call out and that which you ignore. And you shouldn't pretend it all comes from one side of politics. And Albanese also shouldn't really pretend it's getting worse now when it's been far worse not so long ago and coming from his side of politics.
It was the demonstration that got away. A rally against the government's industrial relations plans hijacked by union and Aboriginal anger over John Howard's big pre-budget cuts. Parliament's imposing outer doors proved as flimsy as a curtain. Security staff and police rushed to shore up the inner doors. The mosh pit protest became an organised assault. The just renovated Parliament House shop proved the line of least resistance and demonstrators burst into the building's marble hall. Despite the human wall, the main doors proved porous too.
Smashing their way in, chanting out, "We want Howard," fighting the police. That's what happened in Canberra in August 1996 when John Howard pulled on an early budget after his election. You know, just like Jim Chalmers did last week. Notice any difference about how they were received? The protests at Parliament House that day were organised by the union movement. Labor MPs addressed the crowds at the front of Parliament House. It was a Labor movement protest against an incoming coalition government.
Arrests abounded. There were more than 30 injuries on both sides and a damage bill in the hundreds of thousands of dollars run up before the demonstrators were forced back.
Yeah, that was a horrible, ugly, dangerous day. But so many in Labor and the media continue to unremember it. That was the year Albanese was elected to Parliament. We've asked his office whether he went out the front to attend that protest on that day, as many Labor MPs did before the violence erupted. We're yet to hear an answer. But that episode was shocking, and it should be never forgotten in this country, especially when Labor try to smear their opponents with the coarsening of political debate.